everyone, and welcome to my monthly Telesumit series. So each month, we're going to be hosting an hour-long interview with people that have done some amazing things in their lives. People just like you and me, who will intrigue, inspire, and motivate you with their words and actions, and who will tell you how they choose to live life, not just experience it. So this month's program is entitled The Beauty and Cruelty of It All. But before I introduce my very special guest today, I wanted to talk to you about some logistics. We have lots to cover today, so we're going to take questions at the very end. They can be submitted through a chat room, which is on the left side of your screen. At the bottom of that is a place for you to be able to type in your comments and your questions. And I have put you on mute so that you will be in listening mode, but by making comments on the chat room, you can raise your hand that way. So this chat room will be open during the interview so that you can post your comments and questions and suggestions, but we may not address them right away until the very end. So this interview will be for about an hour, and then we're going to leave questions at the end, leave time for questions at the end. And the slides are somewhat coordinated with our text, but we may be bouncing around a little bit. So now I would like to introduce you to Kathaleen Bartha, whose lovely picture you see on this first slide. She is a New Zealand artist who works in the media of graphics, glass, art, and design. She is a very passionate environmentalist, and she's a baby boomer woman extraordinaire. So I really would like to read to you the description that I used in announcing this Telesummit series, because I think this really is a great introduction for her. So I said, be captivated by the story that Canadian-born Kathaleen Bartha has to tell about her journey to the other side of the world and the development of artistic endeavors that reflect that delicate balance of the beauty and cruelty of nature. At this third stage of her life, she's risen from the ashes, literally, of various challenges in her life and come to a place of self-discovery and wisdom that has now given her a powerful voice for the preservation of our land, sea, humanity, and all natural beings. She's found her purpose and passion through her life experiences and has gone up, down, through, and around in the process. Wait until you hear her amazing stories and insights. So I'm very honored and flattered to welcome Kathaleen. And Kathaleen, I'd like to start with asking you a little bit about your background and just kind of giving us an overview of how you got to New Zealand from Canada.
All right. Hi, everyone. And a special hello to my mother, who is my rock, my soul motivator, and I'll tell you, it all started from her giving me advice when leaving art school. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, so my mom said, well, why don't you find a skill you can fall back on? And with this in mind, having been a nature girl and a flower child, as I was a florist and a landscaper, I continued to develop my art skills and opened up a flower shop in a little town called Laura in Canada, and it was called All in Green. At the time, my partner was a journalist, and he was working in a local newspaper, and a colleague of his was going to be retiring to New Zealand, and he was still back in Canada, so he could get his pension and retire in New Zealand. He said, Kath, he said, do you want to go traveling? I said to him, I'm getting restless, Ted. I said, I really want to do some traveling. I said, I was 17 years old and going on 21, and I, really felt that after art school that I needed to be looking at the wider world. So I said, I'm going to go to Australia. He said, nah, he said, don't go to Australia, Kat. He said, you go to New Zealand, I can guarantee your life will be better there. So basically, with this advice, I packed up, I sold my business, and I was off. My mom gave me a pat on the back and said, where are you going, dear? And I said, I'm going to New Zealand. And she slapped and pat on the back, and literally you know, I really did leave Canada on a whim. I didn't even know anything about New Zealand at the time, and I thought I was going to Tahiti. But, you know, and thinking Paul Rodin and all those beautiful paintings, I'm going to be in Tahiti, this beautiful place. Well, anyway, it wasn't Tahiti, but I fell in love with New Zealand the minute I hopped off that airplane. I'll tell you, I can't explain how or what, but I just felt that I'd come home. And so this is where I am, and this is where I am 32 years later.
It takes a lot of courage what you did to go from Canada to a very unknown place on the other side of the world, literally.
Well, I think you do those sort of things when you're young and naive. I mean, I was really ready for adventure, and I certainly had that.
Yeah, I will say. And one of the things that you mentioned to me when we were talking in preparation for this was your first adventure at sea. And I think that might be interesting to hear because of your current work about the seas. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, it was really interesting because New Zealand was quite a different place at the time, and nowadays the whole viaduct, the port of Auckland was completely transformed. And at the time, I was walking along with my old friend Ted, and I saw this three-masted Baltic trader, a schooner, and I was walking. I said, "Look at that old boat!" And he says, "Yeah, let's go have a look at it." Well, you know, much to my fortunate kind of gutsy kind of saying, "No, let's go." They needed crew to sail down to Nelson, which is the top of the south of New Zealand, and of course the boat was very, very old, built in 1921 in Portugal. And it was pretty rugged, but it was a really interesting experience. And the whole group of people had bought into shares into it so that they could travel around the world. And so, yeah, I took the opportunity and went sailing. And that was my first introduction into Nelson, where I live now for the last 12 years. Admittedly, I had a few close calls because I wasn't much of a sailor. And I could easily have gone overboard and not come back, but here I am today and with lots of stories to tell. So that's my introduction to sailing.
Okay, yeah.
Lots of things, so I'm going to stop there because I'll let you lead.
Okay, well, and we're going to come back to this theme of the sea many times, actually. So, and as I said, we'll kind of be bouncing around with that. So I was wondering if you could tell us what inspired you to concentrate on the oceans, having this first sea experience, and its inhabitants, and why flying fish. And this is a multi-layered question, so if you need me to repeat, I'll be happy to do that. How does your art correlate to that? And I think we're going to go to this. Is it okay to go to the second slide while you talk about that? Okay. Yeah. So here's Kathaleen with her flying fish portrait.
Well, yes, I actually found it really interesting how when I was in Canada, I was more interested in horticulture and plant life. And until I actually had more exposure to the sea, I didn't realize just how much I really loved the marine environment. I had lived in Vancouver Island for a short time, and I think it was at that point that my first kind of glance at the horizon and the beautiful coastal shores that I was really kind of in awe of the whole marine biology subject. And the flying fish themselves, well, that was a reality. You know, I used to go sailing quite a lot with Graham, and every now and then you'd see leaping out of the water these flying fish. It was like, what was that? And I was really fascinated by how these fish could propel themselves and just leap into the air. You know, they vary quite a lot. They've got long fins that enable them to fly for considerable distances. And of course, this is their natural defense mechanism to evade predators. So, you know, a lot of my work is about creative and philosophical, tied together. The fish can be flying fish, especially for me. I, in some ways, see it as a metaphor, and you know, a metaphor for sometimes the way I feel in the world, where I don't always know that I fit, or I feel like I'm just like a fish out of water and not always being 100% certain of my destiny, but kind of, I know what I know, and when I'm in my environment or my own energy, that's how I am. And when I'm not, I feel like a fish out of water. So if that helps you sort of understand a little bit where I'm coming from. Yes, the whole concept of flying fish, I was able to really run with that. And like you do creative imagery for, I guess, for decorative purposes. I like doing decorative work. But I also like the humor in it, and I think, I'm not sure whether Ingrid has the image of the fish jump over the moon, and the one fish, two fish, three fish, blue fish. They sort of come from rhymes and stories that I had as a child, and I think that creativity comes from a lot of different perspectives on what you experience and what you remember. And memory and dreaming plays a really big part in how I work with my artwork.
I think I do not have the fish flying over the moon. I think maybe we do have the later one. Right. So we can refer to that. It's down a bit from where we are right now.
Yeah.
So, and I just think it's fascinating what you're saying about the flying fish being able to escape. And this is sort of reflective of this idea of the beauty and cruelty of nature, which brings me to the next slide, which is this really beautiful picture.
Oh yes, well, is that the one with the moonlight on?
Moonlight on the sea, correct.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because people often ask me, aren't you afraid of sailing? Aren't you afraid of being out on the ocean? And before I sort of had the experience of it, I probably would have been, but honestly, sometimes we're out in the middle of the sea with no wind, and you just see this amazing reflection of the sky and the whole sort of vast horizon. It's just beautiful. And you kind of get a very interesting perspective on things when you're out there in the middle of the ocean, and you see that whole kind of moonscape, seascape is a very global vision. And sometimes they say to people, it's a little bit almost verging on the cosmic experience, because we are such a minute part of the whole system. And I find it really interesting how so that if we are such a minute part of the system, how can we have such a huge, profound impact on our environment? So, living in New Zealand, you can't help but be influenced by
You're really in the middle of it, correct. And I think it's such an interesting contrast between this, where you obviously would want to stay. It's one of those, I want to stay here forever moments, as opposed to the idea of the flying fish, which, is really more about escaping from a certain situation.
Oh, for sure.
So you refer a lot to this theme of the beauty and cruelty of nature, and I thought such a catching phrase. That's really why I named this Telesummit program that way. Which brings me to the next slide, which is of this shark finning and Beauty and the Beast. So do you want to talk a little bit about that contrast between the beauty and the cruelty, or in this case, the slide shows the beast?
Sure. On one hand, I am really inspired by the duality of the natural world. It is beautiful. It's just so inspiring. But on the other hand, I'm really appalled by it, because so much of what is beautiful is very, very quickly being destroyed by human intervention and the impact that we have on our environment. To go further into this, it's sort of like, you look at nature's, it's glorious, but then when you have that sort of situation of what's happening now with earthquakes and tsunamis and floods and really extreme fires, it's like nature's a law unto itself. And I see it in some regards as a monster at the same time. It's just profound, really. And we're having a huge impact on all of this.
So do you feel that our impact on nature and this planet in general is more negative than positive?
Well, there's always that duality again, right? So for all the good things that are going on, there are some really, really wonderful environmental groups and people really out there doing really positive things to help us adapt to climate change and all the rest of it. On the other hand, there's an awful lot of activity going on even in our local community where fishing boats are still going down to the Antarctic and threatening the whole marine environment down there. So, this is serious stuff. And, for example, if people have seen the film The Last Ocean by Peter Young.
Oh, let me bring that slide up while you're talking about that.
Yeah, Peter
Here
Young.
it is.
He's just been around the world showing this film. It's all about, we need to protect this most pristine part of the world as a place that's going to be the evolution of our marine environment, and it's not happening. So, it is really threatening. There's going to be a whole series of decreased food security issues, ocean acidification due to overfishing. The commercial fishing industry down here is really not in a good light, and and I'm living right looking over it. I see the fishing boats going out all the time, and there's a really huge threat about what's going to be happening for the future in terms of whether we will in fact be able to have fish to eat in the future. So the whole decreased food security is a massive problem.
So I saw this film here in Santa Barbara at the Santa Barbara Film Festival. It was being featured. And what really struck me is that I think many people are just not aware of what's happening here, and certainly not of some far-off place like the Ross Sea. And also, what they're being served is being named one thing when it is actually another thing. And I think that raising that awareness is really key to maybe changing these things. And this film is a really good instrument for doing that.
Yeah, no, it is. It's, The Last Ocean, they believe that the Ross Sea has far more value as an intact marine ecosystem than as a fishing ground. And they really wanted to see the whole commercial fishing industry phased out so that we can actually start to see some kind of return in terms of the evolution of the species that are down there. It's a really important film to see. I can't stress that anymore. And I think for a lot of issues like what's happening to the oceans and the acidification, you just have to look online and see what's happening with the drift that's coming over from Japan. I mean, I can't really say any more about this sort of subject because it starts to really, it's going to be a struggle, and I'm really concerned about the future in terms of the environment. So, yes, I think that people who want to see it will see it, people who don't won't.
So on this slide, Kathaleen, it says that this is going to be shown on Tuesday, the 2nd of October. Is that in New Zealand, or is that something, because I see the word Prime on here. Yeah, is this going to be on a station on TV that people could see it?
In New Zealand, it will be on Prime Channel, Prime Time TV.
Okay.
So I think if anyone wants to see the film, they can actually look online and send a message to the Last Ocean website, and certainly when I was having an exhibition here, I made contact with Peter Young, and he came, and we put on the film, and we raised funds for the film, and his film gets packed out wherever he goes, and he's winning lots of awards for all of what he's doing. But at the end of the day, it's up to the politicians to decide what's going to happen, and it's not looking like a pretty picture.
Yes, yes. So that brings to mind, I'm going to pull up the next slide, which is the one of what happens to our reefs as a result. And let me ask you, so what is it that you'd like to see happen? And how does this make you feel about our children and grandchildren and the world that they're going to grow up in?
Well, mostly what I want to see happen is everybody recognizing that, you know, we all need to do something. And that happens on a very local, you know, out your back door kind of thing. We can only do so much to kind of lessen the impact of how much carbon emission there is, for example. You know, our little town here, I keep referring to Nelson because we have so much potential, you know, as a small community. I mean, the council's putting up bicycle tracks and there's lots of good things going on. There's lots of you know, people getting subsidized for doing double glazing and helping getting solar power, and you know, there is a lot of really good stuff going on, and I don't want to seem doom and gloom, because I think that, you know, the technology, I believe that the technology must find a way to make things turn around. And for the future of our children, you know, we've had a great life, I know, most of us have, but it's these young people that I really feel for, and it's very clear to me, even with my colleagues at work, that these young people are just, they're not that interested, you know, they don't necessarily want to even try to do the recycling and that, and I guess it's going to be up to us to keep mentoring and being good role models for them so that they can have a nice natural environment to grow up in.
Yeah, and again, I think it's a question of awareness. I think on some level there have been a lot of efforts to make people more aware of things, but it's like your life still goes along, and there's not a great hardship of any kind. And yes, we see some of these images, but it really hasn't impacted us personally. And maybe that is one of the challenges to do this. And, you know, I'm interested in, too, in how you've come to this, because you talked a little bit about coming to New Zealand and being really enthralled with the beauty there. But for a long time, you were really involved more with family matters, raising your daughter, and, you know, the art part was kind of on the side, and that then evolved into wanting to do more with your art in terms of giving a message about the environment. So in a way, you're using your art to increase this awareness. And what you told me was that in the last 10 years especially, you've really started to find that passion and fulfillment and a purpose in transmitting this message of what we're doing to the environment.
Yes, well, I think have been really passionate about the environment since I was a kid. I really do remember a lot of really kind of important kind of insights I had. I guess that's why I became a florist, and that's why I became a landscaper and worked in garden centers and spent a lot of time learning about growing big trees and growing my own food. It's interesting because the art development and working in the environment, I've always maintained an interest hand in hand. So, you know, I always had either a job working in a garden center or a flower shop, but I also continued with my art studies.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I, you know, throughout my marriage and raising my daughter, I would continue going to workshops and developing my skills. And it wasn't until I came to Nelson that I started to really embrace the whole using my art as a tool for expression in terms of my environmental concerns. And that sort of evolved from having studied multimedia technology, graphic design and multimedia technology. And I was a bit late coming to that. You know, I was only, like, that's about 10, 12 years ago. I was a bit late coming to this whole technology thing. But I very quickly grasped it and realized that if I develop my ideas in a graphic design manner, that I can actually reach a bigger audience than being kind of limited to creating artworks that were going to be traditionally like drawings or paintings or sculpture, and then relying on art galleries, which is, you know, much more of an elite kind of presentation. I guess it's elite in some ways, and in other ways it isn't. But yeah, I really enjoy graphic design. I think that there's, that whole opportunity for the social networking is really important and plays a big part in all of this as well. So you almost need to, if you want to get your word, if you want to get your ideas out there, and you want to communicate, you want to share, that's the way you need to do it these days.
It does seem that way these days, yes. And you're making quite an impact. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of what just happened to you. You had a really horrible tragedy recently. So here is a photo of your studio, which looks so bright and cheery and cozy and full of really wonderful works of art. And then, and I'll bounce around between these two, this is what happened to it shortly after you put your things there. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what happened here?
Sure. Well, I'll just give you a little bit of a brief history
Let
about
me go back.
studio or no studio. But I've been living in Nelson for 10 years already without a workshop or even a studio space. I had a lot of artwork, everything I sort of either sent from Canada or I brought with me. But over the years, I accumulated a lot of really beautiful art materials. I really produced a lot of work that I never showed anybody. I had all of my daughter's drawings and paintings, and finally, I had an opportunity to have a studio workshop, and it presented itself to me about 18 months ago, and it was just so idyllic. And I hope that people who are listening will go on the website and look and read about the history of this place, because it in itself is really interesting. But yes, I had this fabulous workshop. It was 50 square meters, and it was kind of like being in Bandy Land, and I say that because in springtime there are lots of lambs around, and it was amazing. It was very beautiful heritage orchard around, sea views of the Boulder Bank and an old estate home down below, and it was the most amazing setup. I mean, this is where I was really able to spread my wings. But 4 months ago, I'd been visiting. I thought, okay, this year I'm going to go visit my mom. I'm going to go visit my sisters. I hadn't seen them for a long time. See my grandkids up in Auckland, and then boom, I'll get back into my work. Well, I did that in April. Came back at the end of May to Nelson, and went up to the studio. So basically, as soon as I got back, to get some colored pencils, because I wanted to enter a drawing competition that was going to be like a $20,000 award. And I thought, oh my God, I would so love to have the opportunity to submit my work. So I went out and got my colored pencils and started drawing, and the next day I get a phone call from my landlady, and she says, Kath, I've got some really bad news for you. And I said, what's that? She says, your studio's burned down to the ground.
So I'm going to that slide now.
What? And I really didn't want to believe it. I just thought, no, this isn't happening. I'd waited all these years to have a studio. I had everything out there, and next thing, it was just like there was nothing left. I mean, there was nothing left apart from ashes and a handful of compressed charcoal sticks and a smoldering pile of my drawings, and it was just like, wow. And I can't even begin to tell you what was in that place. I had cameras, I had hundreds of CDs, I had all my documentation, reference work to everything that I had done over the last 40 years since leaving high school, or yeah, basically since high school and art school. But for me, the sadness was losing all my daughter's beautiful drawings and writings, and it was kind of like, oh no, but it really was. It was such a shock that I literally was in shock for days. And yeah, I can go more into that, but I think
Well, the way what you had said to me, I thought was so exemplary, and the spirit and attitude that you came out of this with was just so wonderful. And I think one of the things that really inspired you was this slide where you found, I think it's a rock with your daughter's drawing on it. Is that correct?
Actually, the next day, it was that little drawing was actually a paint. It's actually a drawing painting that my daughter probably did in I don't know, kindergarten, maybe 6 years old. But I made one last effort to go out to the site to see if there was anything at all I could find. I was just desperate to find something. And I was just about to leave. It was getting dark, and I kicked a pile of ashes where there was still a bit of smouldering, and lo and behold, this fabulous little painting surfaced, and then other paintings underneath it of my daughters. And honestly, I mean, this was the most amazing joy that I've ever felt. And I was saying, I think what I said to you last week, Ingrid, was that it's amazing how the smallest things like that can actually set you free.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I thought that was a really incredible statement, that you had this sense of freedom, and you were breathing you had a sense of breathing fresh air just in being able to find some of these things.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the next day when I was sitting on the sofa, and this is another one of those real kind of like aha moments, I guess if you want to call it. I was sitting there and I was getting all these phone calls from family and friends and really amazing support. It was wonderful. And they said, "Kath, are you all right? Are you all right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." I said, it was just it was like a breath of fresh air. I suddenly felt as if all the windows in the house had opened, and I just had this amazing sense of just freedom. And that was about, I guess, about not being tied down by my material kind of, my material values or whatever it is. That all these things that I considered so precious were kind of like all my reference points in my life. Well, in fact, I'm still here. Nobody was hurt. Everything was fine, and I was really good. In fact, I was just feeling really positive and really empowered by the fact that I didn't have to be tied to all this stuff, which is what kind of like is what I'm dealing with in terms of letting go and knowing that you don't need to keep accumulating and holding on to things. So I guess that's from that point of view is the main lesson that's come out of all of this is that we do need to learn to let go, and we all have our own ways and processes and experiences that will one day sooner or later make us have to let go. So I guess, yeah, that's the lesson in this for me.
Yeah, and I think it's very ironic in that process of letting go that when you're going through it, it can be very painful and very difficult. And yet when you come out on the other side, as you were just saying, it's like you're all of a sudden you've spread your wings and you have a new sense of freedom and a new sense of possibilities. I thought it was very, very striking that when I was talking to you shortly after this happened, it seemed like you were more concerned for the original owners of the studio than anything. So, as you mentioned, the studio had quite a bit of history. But I thought it was so amazing that when somebody is like you had just had this really tragic event happen, and yet you have this compassion and empathy for other people as well that are also suffering the loss along with you.
Yes, well, it very quickly, an experience like that very quickly makes you realize, hey, if this is what I'm experiencing over this incident, what's it like for all the people just recently in Christchurch that have lost their homes and, from the earthquake? So, yeah. Like my landlady, for example, her family had a huge history, and they were not only very innovative and in the 60s in terms of their pottery industry or their pottery production, but they were also environmental activists. And I really felt for Gwen, my landlady, because her family history was tied up in this property, or is still tied up in this property. And, from that point of view as well, I really felt for her because she is a very, very, very special person. And the fellow who I was sharing the building with, he had an electric bike company next door. And, these people were just doing so much good for the environment. And I just really felt so sorry for them because it kind of just went up into flames. And so they had a lot more to deal with in terms of their their history, and yeah, mine was art materials. Theirs was something else. So if you look online, you'll see the story, and it's Cruenna. The property is called Cruenna, Crewenna, and it's really well worth having a look at.
So is that story on your website as well?
The story is on the website, and
Okay.
it's on the same page as my studio page.
Okay.
And I think there might be some articles that will be sooner or later. My website will be updated with all the articles and reviews that had been written following the fire, because the community was really affected by it.
I'm sure.
Yeah, the community is really great. They'll do anything to help each other here, and that's why I love living in a small town. It really is, it's such a supportive network here that I had so much support. I didn't have a chance to get down or, discouraged, because, hey, I had been invited to an exhibition, and I made a finalist work for that one, and I also had an invite to do a wine label, which I became recognized for as finalist, and followed by Light Nelson, which was our winter festival. And for that, I was given the opportunity to project my video, Walk Without a Shadow of Doubt, onto the Cedar Gallery building. And there's a little story that goes with that as well. But I think we'll come back to that later.
Yeah, okay. So this letting go process actually opens all kinds of new doors, it sounds like, for you and for the original owners, as well as your community. And what I find striking about what you just said is that you really help one another get through that process. And you are able then to go through that process, and I'm bringing up the next slide, which is of your Rising from the Ashes slide, which is, as I was saying earlier, is literally that you were rising from the ashes and started concentrating on your artwork. And something that you said about this picture is that some things come out of misfortune, and it opened up all kinds of new doors, which you've touched on a little bit.
Yes, it really was rising from the ashes. Yeah, it's interesting, like, opportunities that came after, like, very quickly after. It's like people say, when one door closes, the other one opens. Well, I wouldn't have thought that would happen, just so quickly, but it did. And, within the same few days, I had another message from a really good friend of mine who I'd met in Singapore in 1995. It was at the Singapore Botanical Gardens. And this fellow was a horticulturalist whose family have a business in Kalimpong in northern India, and they have a great export business, as well as a very creative family. Now, one of the sisters is a award-winning botanical illustrator for Kew Gardens, and she has I think she must be very much a philanthropist, because she had a dream to build a natural history art school, and she has. And she's doing some amazing workshops with young people, teaching them about protecting the natural environment through their art. And that same day they invited me to come to India, so I'm hoping that will be on the program for next year. The other really amazing thing was that my partner Graham, who is a yacht captain and very professional sailing skipper, he had sold a little boat earlier this year, but wasn't planning. We did a lot of sailing with this little boat, but we hadn't been doing a lot recently, so he sold it and thought, okay, we'll just put it aside and we'll do some sailing some other time. Well, anyway, a really beautiful boat came up on the market.
So I'm going to show that boat right now. There it is.
This is Castillo, everybody. This is going to be our home when he comes back. Graham's away at the moment, delivering the yacht from Auckland to Hawaii for a client. But this boat came up for sale, and it's a Canadian boat built in Vancouver Island. And the young family that owned it had been planning to get the immigration here. He was a pilot, but sadly for him, he was turned down, so the family had to go back to Canada. And they had just finished refitting this boat, so they'd spent over a year doing a complete refit on it. And Graham went to see it, and he came to me home and said, "Kathy, you got to come and see this boat." So I said, "Okay." Well, I went on board and I fell in love with it instantly. I wasn't planning on doing any sailing again for a long time, but I fell in love with this boat. Graham and I both fell in love with this boat. So Graham made a ridiculous offer, and the offer was accepted.
That's great.
So it was like, oh my God, how lucky. Mum would always say, Mum has a funny saying about people with horseshoes, don't you, Mum?
Yeah, don't finish the rest of the sentence.
Graham knows about the horseshoes. Well, anyway, we decided that we're going to, in the next 2 years, spend some time sailing to some of these pristine parts of the world. And we've already planned that when he comes back in mid-November, we're going to rent our house out to some friends, and we're going to move on board and live on board for 6 months and go cruising up to Auckland, and then we're going to head straight down to the deep south of New Zealand, Fiordland, Stewart Island, Dunedin, all the parts where there are still untouched parts of the environment. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. And yeah, this is going to be our new home.
So you indeed have been rising from the ashes.
Absolutely.
So this whole process of letting go has really had a positive outcome. And I'm just wondering, what advice do you have for us in the wake of something really tragic and terrible happening, and then all these good, you're open to all these good things that happen afterwards?
Well, I think you have to be open to it. I mean, you don't really have a choice. And I didn't have a choice with happened about the fire. I mean, basically, that was very clear, you know, and I had to accept that this has happened, and it's a loss, but I need to move on from this. And for me, yeah, it was really coming to terms with a lot of values, and I think that when the opportunities arise, you just never know what's going to be around the corner. And I think that if the sooner, you know, we do come to terms with letting go and just keeping an open mind, the easier it is to move on. Yeah, I could say more about that as well. But
so how would you characterize your life? So what's happened to you in the past? What's happening to you in the present, meaning right now, and maybe in the last few months? And what do you hope the future will bring? Not just with the boat, but just in general for the rest of your life.
Well, I guess you could say that, you know, I was willing in the past to sort of take some risks and, you know, step outside that little safety net. And sometimes it isn't easy for me, but then I'll lie there in bed and I'll be thinking of something, and I'll just think, oh my God, I just have to move on from this. And I'll get out of bed and I'll just think, okay, it's a new day, let's start something new. You know, at this point in my life, maybe people would think that maybe some people have a midlife crisis, but I don't see it like that. I think that basically I've always been a passionate person. I've always pursued my passions, my arts, and my interest in the environment and nature. And it's something that I've always done. And I've done it on, you know, sometimes it's a little bit of a roller coaster for me, but, you know, most of the time, I think I've really learned to evaluate what I've learned from the past experiences. And I do have a much better sense of where I'm at in myself at the moment in terms of my relationships and what I do want in the future. And you asked me that a year ago, I would have been, I don't know, you know, but now it's kind of like, okay, you know, I feel like the fish is swimming upstream again instead of against the current. And, you know, I do recognize that there are things that I continue to have to move on from the past. I mean, it doesn't go without saying that every now and then the old dragon rears its head, and I know it's a bit cliche, but it does. And
well,
I think that is common for a lot of women at this point in their lives.
Absolutely, I think that's very true. That well, I found one sentence that you said to me very striking, and that was that you recognize that in order to move on, we can't be living in the past. And I think that is so true of many of us, that we sometimes get stuck because we are living in what's happened in the past and can't effectively move beyond that.
Yes, well, I think as a mother too, we kind of like, I don't know, it's sort of like, we have a lot of memory, and I'm the worst one for being a romantic. I tell you, I really have a lot of sentiment in my heart, and sometimes it works for me, and sometimes it doesn't work for me. But I do recognize that we do need to keep moving on, and there are opportunities out there. We do need to know who we are. We do need to stand on our own 2 feet. And if you ask me, what can I hope for the future? Well, I think in very kind of a clear message, I think, what more can we ask for the future than to become more compassionate with one another as a human race, and also to kind of find ways to bring our earth environment back into a safe place, because it needs a lot of it. It needs really compassion, and not for ourselves, but for the planet. And I really hope that for the future that there will be some really positive changes to the climatic crises that we're in, as a united global nation.
And for our young people too. It brings me back to this slide that you gave me of this circle of young people on the beach. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, well, that photograph is actually represents the Pacific Island people, who are very close to here, and what's happening for them is that with climate change, the sea levels are rising. So that's going to be a really important part of people looking after one another, because these people are very vulnerable to losing their homes, their land, not only just from the sea rising, but from the overfishing, in the commercial fishing industry. These people are going to end up being very desperate, and it's really important to know that, we who have or able to share or who have compassion for others is a very important part of our development process, because there's a lot of people out there who need help. And just stop just being needy, I suppose, and finding possible ways to help each other.
It falls back on that theme of awareness. I think we just need to keep drumming that same song about making people more aware of things like the rising of the oceans, and that there are indeed going to be nations at risk because they are right at sea level. And we have some of that in the United States, just in Florida.
Yeah, well, when you're close to that environment, you see it all the time. Like, you see New Zealand, we're just like totally this little island nation in this huge big sea, and so our news, our people, our population is made up a lot of South Pacific Island people, and so they're like they're like the family down here, I guess.
Well, I think that's great. I think your message of having a greater sense of community and compassion for one another is definitely a call to arms for all of us to be able to practice that a little bit more. So let's talk a little bit about your artwork. I do want to get to that too, and we've kind of touched on it, but let me go to this slide where you have several pieces of artwork showing. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. In terms of your ocean trips, I think this is kind of the theme of your ocean trips and how they've contributed to that outlook that you have on your art and the environment and life in general.
I think you're referring to the little clip, is it, with several images on it?
Yeah, there's 2 images on it. There's a very brightly colored one, and then there's fish underneath. And I'm sorry, I didn't name these, so I can't refer to you what the name is.
Okay, I see the one. Okay. So I think that one was called, the one on the top with the jellyfish and the fish net.
Correct.
Okay.
And if I can interrupt you for 1 second, I just want to tell everybody that Kathaleen has a different screen than I do, so we are trying to coordinate the pictures, but it's a little bit confusing between them. And I did not name these pictures, but I think we're on the same page at this point, right, Kathleen?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that picture is called A Sailor Went to Sea. For those who can see it, that's actually a painting 2.4 meters wide on an aluminium sheet. And it's very reflective, and I did it with lots of archival inks and acrylic paints, and it represents this sort of ideas or imagery or colors that I actually see in my mind or out at sea. I mean, it's very directly inspired by that environment. And this painting is about, again, I like to somehow kind of express my response to the environment through my work. And this one kind of shows you the delicate nature, the delicate balance that we have with nature. And, you know, as I said before, you know, sometimes when living on board, it's a really great experience. Other times, you know, you have to batten down the hatches and you need to adapt. But this is typically an image that's expressing about the jellyfish and the drift nets. And the jellyfish are there because of the, not only just the heating of the sea, the water levels are changing, but also because a lot of the predator fish are being wiped out. So we're going to be seeing more and more of this in the future, more jellyfish and more kind of change of what's going to be available in terms of our fishing industry. So again, this is an expression of my response to what's happening while we're at sea. The following one is Flying Fish, of course, and that one's called Flying Fish Rhapsody. These were my works, my most current works. I work on different substrates. I don't always paint typically on canvas, but these are works on aluminium, and this is on glass, which is tempered glass or toughened glass. And both these works I use for interior installations as well, because I can use these as lighting, or I can use these as indoor-outdoor, because they are certified glass panels that kind of comply with building requirements for earthquake and that sort of thing. So yeah, so I do consider the materials and the substrates that I work with. I try not to pollute the environment. I gave up printmaking many years ago because I was using a lot of toxic materials that were back in my house, and as well for disposing of. So I'm very careful in terms of what I choose to create and the materials I use to create them with.
So I was going to ask you a question about your general philosophy about art, but you're answering it. You're basically talking not just about the artwork itself, but the way in which you use the materials and what you use. And I wanted to go to the next slide and just continue this review that you are telling us about. This is the slide that shows the art for the masses.
Oh yeah, right. In 2006, I went back to college and studied multimedia, graphic design, and multimedia. And this is one of my projects that ended up becoming an exhibition. And again, I like using a variety of mediums to communicate my ideas. So sometimes what I do is I just get an idea and I get stuck into it. And this was very much like that. It wasn't preconceived. I just had this idea. So we're looking at the ideas of how I integrate my ideas with art and technology and how I explore those mediums. This one here with the traffic jam they're all about 600 millimeters in diameter, and these are perspex panels with a frame that can be seen from both sides. And these works were hung up in a local cafe. Now, the idea behind these were that this was all created from product that was made in China. So that's why I named it the Made in China series. And there wasn't anything kind of handmade in this whole collection of works. It was all stuff that was available at my disposal from the $2 shop. So in the first one, for example, traffic jam was a statement about literally the traffic jam, and that was inspired by coming home from Los Angeles one year, being stuck in traffic going to the airport. I mean, it was just like, whoa, you know, this image came, or this is actually a sculpture, was one of the works that I had created from that experience.
Those of us who are from this area can certainly understand that, having experienced the traffic in LA. It's amazing.
It's like a little kaleidoscope or a mosaic of 125 matchbox metal cars that I had created inside this Perspex panel. And so, like, these are the ideas that I have, and this is how I was going to use it. But I used both technology and sort of hand executed combinations of designing my work.
So are all these things on your website as well for us to look at, and do you have an explanation for them?
This particular exhibition I don't have on the website because I did this in 2006.
Okay.
But my current website is more about my more current ideology, basically. This was more about having more philosophical, I'd say, like piece by piece with jigsaw puzzle pieces, all hand printed, piece by piece. So PEACE by PIECE, and that was combined as a jigsaw puzzle. The next one was a whole bunch of popsicle sticks that was, you know, make a wish, go live and dream. Like the idea was that you could drop a popsicle stick into the top of this panel and you could make a wish.
That's a very intriguing title.
Yeah. The other one was a scramble of, like, in graphic design, typography is a really important part of design. So I took a whole bunch of these flocked letters, like fonts, and I scrambled them, and you had to kind of find your way. So it's called Find a Way. And of course, the last one was for trade aid shop window, and it was May Your Vision Be for World Peace. And it was a series of little plastic magnetic alphabets that you get from your kids, and gold leaf. And I had that hanging up for our arts festival at the trade aid show. So, you know, I find fun. I have a lot of fun with putting things in public places. I'm not really great at doing exhibitions, but I really enjoy doing things that public, that people can interact and you know, like my little video clip that you'll see on the website. You know, putting that on the Studio Gallery building was so much fun because people would just come along and interact, and they dance and they sing, and you know, it was really good. So I'd say for me that technology, embracing design skills and technology has been really empowering for me.
So this one, Find a Way, reminds me of what Diana Nyad, the swimmer, just said, that if things do not work the way that you are doing them or trying them, that you find a way to make it happen. And that was a very empowering message for her accomplishments of finally living her dream, making her dream, making the wish and go living her dream, that she was able to do this. So I think these titles are very compelling and very reflective of some of your artwork reflecting this very deep message.
Well, and I think that's where our age is on our side, you know. It's like you say, your friend, that find a way. I mean, you do have to find a way. But I also believe that when we get to a certain point in our lives, we need to be confident about that internal message that we have, that intuition. And I think that's
absolutely
of our age, you know, experience, is that we can start trusting more that I can do this. You know, I'm confident I can do this, and then listening to the adult in ourselves, and not referring back to the child that, you know, feels frightened or nervous or doesn't want to take risks. And hopefully we all mature in terms of our confidence.
Absolutely. And that makes me then want to go to the next slide, which is called Walk Without a Shadow of a Doubt. And again, a very intriguing title. And the question that I have for you, of course, is how this came about, but then also what words of wisdom do you have for women like us who, in this third stage of our lives, are looking for some joy and some purpose and fulfillment, and certainly you found it.
Right, okay, so you asked me how Walk Without a Shadow of Doubt came to be, and it actually, I do want to talk about that one because it evolved into lots of different kind of perspectives in my work and philosophy. It all started when sitting at the traffic lights one day in the middle of the pouring rain in Auckland. I was thinking, oh my God, what are all these people doing? Where are they going? What are they, what's it all about, And it was like people rushing to get somewhere. And I came home to Nelson and I painted a painting. And again, it was titled Walk Without a Shadow of Doubt. Later on, I took that painting and I reproduced it into a video clip, which is the one I'm referring to that's on the website, Walk Without a Shadow of Doubt, which is a series of animation still shots combined with music, and it's really quite fun and quite quirky. When the wine label competition presented itself, our local grocer at Fresh Choice, he's very supportive of the Nelson artists. He put up an award, or a prize award, for a wine label for his favorite wine, and his approach was selecting 5 artists and posting them up in the supermarket, and people could vote. Nobody would know who was whose, but people could vote. Well, anyway, I submitted an image for the wine label, and I missed out winning the first prize, but he came back and offered the other 3 finalists a monetary award in the case of wine, and the privilege to have a wine label that is proving to be quite a successful marketing for him.
And I just posted that picture, Kath, so that picture of the 3 bottles is now up.
Right. So I've managed to get, this is all coming from, within weeks of supply. In such a crazy short space of time, all these wonderful things were happening. And all I can say is that it's, we've all got it in us. We really do. We've all got that little part of ourselves, what we call intuition, or, gut feeling. And, all I can say is listen to your heart and have faith, and even when you feel it's a struggle, I think it's really important to go with that struggle, to feel that pain, but also to realize that there's the other side of the coin, and that's the lightness. And I keep saying to people, you that say they're not an artist, but you can express yourself. Everybody's creative. You might be creative with food, you might be creative with sewing or writing or whatever, and that creativity is a really important part of developing the spirit, and it's a wonderful thing to share with people. It's, it can be a lot of fun, but, the problem is that creativity is kind of squashed out of us, at a very young age, and that's really unfortunate because, it doesn't have to look like this or be perfect or anything else. And I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and we need to be kind to ourselves. We can be terrible critics, and that fear of being judged by others is something we also need to let go of. So, there's a lot that's come out that I'm recognizing now, that it's really important to recognize that, sure, this can be a struggle, but on the other side, there's a lot of reward and satisfaction from working through, dilemmas or whatever. And and I just think, as my daughter wrote at a very young age, and I still have that little drawing. Thank goodness it did. A selection of Mickey's drawings came surfacing out of the pile of ashes, and one of them was a fountain. It's a little drawing of a fountain. It's just beautiful. And at the top of the page, she's written, "I will and I can." And, that was just like, wow, that kid's taught me so much over the years. bless your heart.
So it's a good example of out of the mouths of babes, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
The youth has a lot to tell us, but in reviewing this question with you, I think one of the advantages of our life experiences, good and bad, is that we gain a lot of wisdom. And in reviewing this question with you, you are saying some really wonderful things for us to keep in mind. And one of the things that really struck me of what you said, that, well, I'll quote you, it doesn't matter all that stuff that happens, because ultimately we need to know who we are and where our heart lies and be true to ourselves. And sometimes it takes a whole lifetime to find out what that means exactly.
Yeah, and when you get a taste of it, it gives you another strength to your bow. I'll tell you, I've learned a lot from these last few months. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, but I've certainly learned a lot. And it's really been great to even have this opportunity to even talk about it, because, as I said, everything that I had, that I created, or my reference and my documentation, that's all gone. So this is really important to me, to be able to tell the story. And I really do have to thank you for the opportunity, Ingrid. I was a bit nervous at first, but I thought, no, this is a really good opportunity.
Oh, I'm just delighted that you are here. And I'm going to put up your website slide next. So if you would like to check out Kathaleen's artwork and her many wonderful messages, powerful messages about her own life and her own art, but also the environment, her website is the Four Winds Studio, and you see here on the screen it is www.fourwindsstudio.com. And I'm sure, Kathaleen, you would love to hear from people. There is a great contact page on there. And if you have any questions or suggestions or comments, I'm sure Kathaleen would love to hear them. And I'm just so honored and flattered that you have agreed to do this interview with me. It has been so wonderful to talk about all of these things and to really see your journey from what was a very ordinary existence, even though it seems like you were always a nature child and drawn to that. You really, even though you were with your hands in the art world, you really went into raising your family and doing all of those things, and really now you are coming into your own. And that's one of the messages of this Telesumit series, that it's never too late to find that and to really just start to develop things, even if it means at a later age. So again, I want to thank you, Kathaleen, and I want to thank all of you for listening in and being a part of this Telesumit series. As I said at the very beginning, this is something that we are trying to offer to people, to give you a guest who intrigues, inspires, and motivates you, and really is an example of how you can live your life, not just experience it. So this is my website, my coaching circle. I do a lot of workshops on transitions, and I'm also doing a lot of work with emotional intelligence. I would love to hear from you as well. And I am going to now open this up to questions and see if anybody has any. And I am going to unmute you so that you can put something in the chat room if you have any questions for us. So I will wait a minute for that. Well, there don't seem to be any. So Kathaleen, again, thank you so much for being part of this interview with me. It was really fascinating, and you said so many wonderful, articulate things that I think are going to be of great use to us all. And I look forward to really checking out your website now and in the future. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening in.